right then, time to start this session. And I've been a little bold here saying the recipe for enterprise agility, but I should have added with Kanban, because I realized that there are different ways of looking at scaling and becoming agile at the enterprise level. Anyway, I hope that you're expecting something that has to do with Kanban, because that's what I'm going to talk about. And for those of you who joined at the last session, you will have heard this, but please bear with me. I founded my company Agile Agenda 18 years ago, and ever since then I've been working with agile systems some way or the other, so I have a lot of hands-on, and what I'm talking about here is based on experience and not just academia. I started working with Scrum, then later with SAFe, and that was not really a big pleasure for me. For the past 5 years, I've been working with Kanban only. The reason for that, I guess, is that I've seen with my own eyes that it's working basically everywhere I've been. So that's why I decided to focus solely on that. And as I mentioned in my last speak, when you're talking about enterprise agility, you have to say leadership maturity in the same sentence, because you cannot scale anything if you don't have leadership that's mature enough to do it. It's two sides of the same coins. But I guess that increasing agility, that's been high on the agenda for many, many years. And back in 1999, I was PMI certified. The reason being that at that time I was working in digital, and the company was bleeding money on poorly delivered projects. So they decided, well, all project managers need to be certified because we need to be more reliable, more dependable. We need to deliver according to budget, so on and so forth. So they actually asked us to be more agile, you might say. And even the classic methods that we've been working with for more than 50 years now, they have also turned in a more agile direction and done some work to make methods, standards, frameworks smell agile as well. And they've recognized too that we are probably not going to forget about agility anytime soon. I know that these days people are talking about agility being dead. I don't believe that. I think that working and becoming more and more agile is as relevant and as important as it's always been. And I guess that the quest that we have all been seeking is to increase the efficiency and also the possibility to cope with uncertainty and changing priorities. And since we're working with knowledge, most of us, I would assume, there is high uncertainty, and you need to be able to adjust the course based on what happens in reality. And that's what I like about Kanban, because it's focused on what happens in real life and not in somebody's dreams. And in any case, the customer, they don't care about how you work. They just want their stuff as soon as you can deliver it to them. They just want their goods. And this, again, those of you who came to my last session, you will have seen some of the slides, but the topic is different. But customer lead times is a topic that's always interesting. The clients, they do care about when do I place the order and when do I get my things, and the time it takes to deliver it, that's important to clients. And they don't care if you're working agile or not. They really don't care. But there are several productivity issues that are hindering scaling. And again, I'm talking from a practical perspective, having worked, and I'm not kidding you, with hundreds of teams over the past many years. And in many cases, you're walking into a company and they can't see what's going on. They really don't have any transparency, and nobody can really tell what is the status about the activities that are ongoing. And there are not alignment between business units in terms of priorities, between the different silos, and you will also experience long wait times when you hand over because of those priorities that are not aligned, you might end up in somebody else's pile, and it's anybody's guess when that team is going to start working on it. I have very often experienced a hand over the fence mentality in the way that we are finished with our stuff and then we throw it over to the other team, and you don't really recognize whether they're catching it or not. It just happens at random, and that's not really very helpful. Bottleneck issues, very often architects, IT specialists of some sort. And I've often wondered, if they are missing the IT architects all the time, why don't they hire somebody, some extra one, and fire that guy over there who's not particularly busy? But then again, I'm a practical person, and that's obviously not how things work, but I always wondered why, if you see a bottleneck somewhere, why don't you try and fix it? No clear view of the service delivery process, and that's what I have depicted here, where usually you don't have one single team that can work with something end to end. You need to deliver through several teams, but there's not really any clear view of the service delivery process. And there's a lot of things going on, and I was talking to somebody here in the conference. The worst case that I experienced was a Kanban implementation I did, where it also involved the project managers. There were 7 project managers, and they had 72 projects going on. And who are you kidding? You cannot work with 72 projects when you're 7 project managers. It really doesn't make sense. So a lot of things are being pushed onto an organization that doesn't have the capacity to deliver. But to craft a recipe, I just promised you a recipe for enterprise agility. You need to understand what is it that you want to make happen. In this case, we're talking about enterprise agility. You want some ingredients, you want some components that you can put together to create this outcome that you're looking for. And you also want some instructions. How are we going to do this to make it happen so that we can get the outcome that we are looking for? So we need these 3 things. But what do we mean when we are talking about enterprise agility? Well, there are 3 flight levels, and those of you who attended Mike's speak just before, he was talking about Klaus Leopold and his flight levels thinking. And I guess it's exactly the same in any organization that you can be looking at. You have somebody making up the strategy, somebody who's coordinating stuff, the portfolio level, and you have somebody executing the stuff. That's how it works. So when we're talking about Scrum, for instance, you are talking about team agility. You are working in one single team and are handling it according to the Scrum process. But that was never meant for scaling. And you might say that, as I write here, small-scale agility, it's going to drown in all sorts of mess that happens when you are looking across those silo boundaries or across team boundaries. So even if you have this wonderful team being very efficient and working just brilliantly, their efficiency will just drown in everybody else's mess. You need to get a grip on service delivery instead. Portfolio agility takes place when you have the coordination level involved as well. And that might smell a bit of safe and agile release trains, but we are not being enterprise agile, not yet. And this happens when we have everybody involved, and that might be something that we are dreaming of, but it could happen. That's a decision that you make. And I heard Mike say just before that you are not agreeing that we are speaking the same language, but I like the thought of speaking Kanban in all those different levels of the organization. So we are understanding what we are talking about when we are talking about upstream or downstream, or the different processes and practices that we are using in the Kanban method. But surely Mike is right when he is saying that when they are speaking together, their language is completely different from people talking on the portfolio level and the team level as well. But we are back again to the little lady and her ordering Service X. She doesn't care whether we are agile or not. But if we want enterprise agility, we need to be in agreement about what are the priorities, so that you don't have a business unit one working in this direction and number 2 working in a different direction and number 3 working in a third direction. You need to be in alignment, because otherwise things are going to happen at random depending on what the business unit managers think. Which is why I am tempted to say that getting to enterprise agility is about mitigating those cross-boundary flow stoppers. And that can only happen if you have the leadership on board. So I guess this is again a bold statement, that enterprise agility, that will be stopping when you have a manager saying, I don't care, I'm not going to do this. This is not the way that I want to work. So enterprise agility comes to a full stop. And what is as soon as possible? And I know that some of you have seen this slide before, but it is an illusion to speak about enterprise agility if you don't have any predictability across the network. So if this service X that our little lady here is ordering have this fat-tailed lead time distribution, you're completely unpredictable. And if you have a spread that's between 2 and 74 days, which might not be at all impossible, it might even be worse, what are you going to promise this little lady? Are you going to say, well, best case 2 days, worst case 74? If I were a client, I wouldn't be particularly happy with that. But the lead time data will show you how you perform, and that's one part of Kanban as well. It's data-driven, so we are deciding what to do based on the data we see and based on the performance that we can see is happening with our own eyes. We want to have this tail trimmed, meaning that the shorter the tail is, the higher the predictability is. And to get to that point, you need to be in control of your bottlenecks and your dependencies, and you need to work actively to analyze blockers. Why do they occur? So you collaborate also across business units to figure out how can we help each other mitigate the risk of all of these bad things happening. How can we remove those blockers and those dependencies one after another? And then over time, the tail is going to become shorter and shorter. And the wait times will be shorter, and the impact will be lower. So a mature organization will always work to trim the tail. We need 3 things. We also need some ingredients, the components that are making the outcome that we would like. And to scale the agility, you need to have predictability across the network. And that means that we are talking service delivery across teams. We need to get a picture of what are those. But getting to enterprise agility, it's not something that you decide after having seen a nice slide deck from a big consulting organization. It happens when you start working with it, and it happens evolutionary. And it's definitely not a free ride for managers. They need to think in systems. They need to understand the system that they're working in. And you need to have aligned leadership that trusts their teams. And trust is very high. If we can get into something that's self-organizing, fine. But sometimes the trust is not there. So in that case, it's not going to happen. But strong aligned leadership that trusts their teams, that would be a very good thing if you want to achieve enterprise agility. And also a trustworthy and stable prioritization mechanism. A culture that values customers and values quality, and also understand service delivery and uses data to make those informed decisions. The problem is that many organizations' reward systems, they do not value cross-team collaboration. They value silo thinking. So you are rewarded based on what you are achieving in your silo, and this is not where we want to go. But people, they tend to act on what they are being rewarded from. So maybe if somebody would consider changing the reward system for cross-team performance instead of silo performance, I would definitely think that would be a good idea. And the problem is that service delivery don't follow that nice, strict organizational diagram. It flows across one silo to the next, and it involves different teams. So your ability to cooperate with those teams is going to make a huge difference in whether you can create agility or not. And it's also important to say that Kanban can be used at any level in the organization. So if you can imagine that we have a strategy where you can see some new strategic elements coming in upstream, and the ones that we're working on right now are downstream, and then it seep down through this organization in the silos, but also looking at service delivery across silos, then we are creating a system that can work both when you're looking on the different levels, but also across boundaries. And the good thing is that the service delivery teams, here you can see in this red circle here, or it's not exactly a circle, but this workflow here, it involves some teams, but in case this service becomes obsolete for some reason, it's not important anymore, then you can easily just say, well, we don't have any service delivery Kanban system, let's just get rid of that, and then as other services emerge, you make new Kanban systems for those services. So it's a very flexible and fluid way of organizing teams, and it's easily changed if you need to change them. And this, as opposed to changing an agile release train or even a Scrum organization, it's just very traumatic to make that change, because it was traumatic to get it in place in the first time around. So therefore, Kanban likes this fluid way of thinking and the ease of changing the organization as the reality changes. And we do have the Kanban maturity model, where you can find a lot of guidance on how to deal with it. This is an organizational evolution, and as maturity rises, because it's been measured empirically across the world that most organizations are not really very mature. Even if they're very successful, they're not very disciplined, they're not very structured, they're not very mature. So we cannot put a lot of very complex practices in the heads of immature teams, because they wouldn't know what to do with them. Instead, we need to see, okay, where are we right now, and what can we do to slowly improve evolutionary? So let's look at what Kanban says about scaling. And before doing that, a few Kanban basics, and those of you who heard it before, I do apologize, but all organizations are different and one size fits nobody. We need to adjust the system that we ask people to work in so that it fits to their context and to their situation, to their maturity, etc. And importantly, we don't limit time. Instead, we limit work in progress. That's important because, again, we have habitually, when we are thinking agile, we are thinking sprints, we are thinking PIs, but it's a structure that's actually causing you to spend a lot of time planning, estimating, decomposing tasks, and replanning again when there's spillover to the next sprint, and then the circle just continues. So we are spending a lot of time of achieving basically not so much. Instead, we ask in Kanban, limit work in progress so that it fits with the capacity that you have in your teams. Meaning that you need to be very clear on your priorities from the strategic level. These are the 3 things we want to achieve within the next 3 months or whatever, 1 year. And also, when it seeps down through the coordination level and down to the team level, it all fits with the capacity of the organization and of the teams. And at the end of the day, you cannot get more than the capacity allows you to get. Reality always wins, right? So even if you start 72 projects, you're not going to get 72 finished any day soon. Therefore, instead, limit the number of projects so it fits with the number of project managers or however you work with projects in your organization. And last but not least, don't focus on teams only. Focus on the system. It's fine that we have teams that work well together, and it's fine that we like working together, but we also need to produce something, and that something is spanning cross teams, like I guess I said it a couple of times already. So we need to focus on how the system works and not only on the teams. And the law of work, how any kind of work will happen when you are, at least I have the imagination to see that it can be different from this. You have some new requirements coming in. It depends on what organizational level you're on. They might be big lumps, or they might be smaller lumps, or they might be very, very, very small lumps if you are a small operations teams of some kind. It comes in from numerous channels. And that's where the disaster begins, because how are you going to decide what to work on when you have, let's say, 5 or maybe even more stakeholders? And what are you going to do with the dark matter when people are tapping you on the back and say, please help me doing this? A lot of strange things happen, but we need to be organized in the way that we handle our intake. And in this case, you will see a process which is from a real team that I worked with, where you are having new requirements coming in, and at first you're doing some business screening, saying, do we want to do this or don't we want to do this? And maybe they say, yeah, we want to do it, but not now, maybe later. Or they say, yes, please, let's do it now. And then in the end, in the upstream process, it ends in your top 10. So you know that those top 10 activities you definitely want to do. Then we have a commitment point, and this is where we have a client in the other end waiting for us to deliver whatever we are delivering. And we have a team saying, yes, we are going to do it almost immediately, because very soon it's going to jump over the commitment point, down into the delivery board, into our Kanban system, our downstream Kanban system. And again, it depends on where you are, at what level in the organization you are working, whether those lumps of work in your downstream board are very big or they are smaller. But the principle is exactly the same. And that's what I mean when I'm talking about speaking the same language. We know what is upstream, what is downstream. We know what the commitment point is. And we know that we can't overload our organization because it's not going to happen anyway. You can only get what you have the capacity to deliver. And here we have a process as well. It doesn't really matter, but the fact of the matter is that you design this system so it fits exactly with the teams, and all teams are different, so therefore the workflow upstream and the workflow downstream is possibly different as well. Then we're having a demand manager responsible and accountable for the upstream work. And that's not the same as a product owner, because he's that single person that is responsible for the upstream stuff. We are having somebody involving stakeholders and trying to make a fair way of sorting so that you're not doing something at the expense of somebody else's wishes. And on the other end, you have a delivery manager responsible and accountable for downstream flow. And this is where he's looking at lead times and stuff like that we were talking about before. And there's always an upstream funnel. So either you put it in a big black plastic bag and you pick up activities at random, or you handle it consistently and rationally in a way that's fair and that is understandable for the stakeholders that are giving you stuff into your upstream. And as I mentioned before, Kanban is not a process. It's something that you are designing so it fits your context with change management principles, service delivery principles, and general practices. And all of them are, in fact, key to maturing the organization. And only mature organizations can scale. The point is that you start with what you do now, and then you build from there in an evolutionary change process. And you show acts of leadership. We like leadership. And also going from silo thinking to a service delivery way of thinking, that's also key to scaling, because if you're not in control of your system, if you don't know what service you're delivering and how they are delivered, how can you ever get in control of this system and become predictable? We need to become predictable across the whole network. And the 6 general practices are, of course, also extremely important because they are the how-to in Kanban. And when you are not very mature, you don't use very many of these sub-practices that are connected with the general practices. And the more mature you get, the more practices you implement. And again, it's coming slowly but surely as the teams are ready to absorb new things. We cannot push a lot of change because people can't really cope with a lot of things that they need to change at the same time. But how do we then put together these ingredients? Because now you saw the ingredients, the Kanban method, the building blocks of the Kanban method. Now we are going to look at how we put them together so we can achieve the outcome, which was enterprise agility. And you cannot scale without organizational maturity. Your enterprise potential will always be limited by your leadership maturity, and only mature leaders can mature an organization. So, agility is not a team thing. It's something that happens in the network of services and in the whole organization, at least if you want to really make a change that matters. And now, looking at the Kanban maturity model, and you might get all dizzy. That's not exactly what I want. But at the very top, you can see the 6 general practices, the ones that I showed you before. And then you can see all the sub-practices, all the specific practices that are connected with those different key practices. So, as you can see, when you are immature, you only use a few things because, again, we cannot say, let's go full power ahead and do all these Kanban practices. Everybody is going to drown. It's not going to happen. Instead, we start small and then we expand from there. But the service delivery focus, that emerges on level 2 to 3. Until then, it's mainly a team focus. How is our team doing? How is our team performing? But we would like our enterprise to perform. And that's not going to start happening until you reach maturity level 2.75 to 3, unfortunately. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them at any time. But anyway, the model was built so that there's always concrete guidance as to how to do it. So it's not like a frame that you need to fill yourself. It's something that's actionable, it's doable, and you can look in the book and see these are the practices that we would expect to see when you're working at this particular maturity level. So, when we want to scale agility, then the first thing you need to do is to fix quality issues and to try and have the mentality of a first time right. Because rework and bug fixing and error fixing, that's the same. That's not a law of nature. That's not a law of nature. So we want to strengthen the way that we are working with our stuff, so we are focused on giving our clients something that they can use the first time around. And as you can also see, when you are working at the lower levels of maturity, when you are team-focused, you will often see that there's a lack of trust in those low maturity organizations. You will see a lot of micromanagement. You will see a lot of teams not trusting other teams. Maybe you are going to speak badly about your colleagues and calling them names rather than collaborating with them. You will see all sorts of things that shows you that there's no trust in this organization. But if you want to strive for higher maturity, higher agility, enterprise agility even, then you need to build trust between your different nodes in the network. You cannot scale when you're not very mature. You need to build maturity before you can scale. This quote is coming from Kanban University saying, and I know that you can read all of you, but I'm going to say it aloud anyway, identifying services and achieving flow of information are keys to the scaling across the enterprise. And I even forgot the keys. And I guess that the flow of information, I guess, Mike, you touched upon it as well in your speech. You need to talk to people because otherwise, you're just going to make up things instead of knowing what exactly are they thinking and how can we help each other becoming more smooth when it comes to service delivery. But when you're looking at the team level, I'm sure that you can recognize some of these meetings from Scrum. The retrospective and the Kanban meeting usually happens once a month, the retrospective, and usually every day the Kanban meeting. But the replenishment meeting has to do with how you make stuff come from the upstream system to the downstream system. And then we are adding a flow review and blocker clustering as well. And I want to mention that this is a simplified view. Kanban is expanding it more than I'm doing right here, but just for the purpose of clarity. We are concerned about blocker clustering because blockers occur if you haven't handled your dependencies upstream. Your dependencies are not a secret. You know that you need pizza from that other department if you are going to deliver whatever you are delivering. You know that already, and you should have dealt with it upstream. But if you don't, it's going to be a blocker downstream. So we want to understand, why are these blockers occurring? What is it in our system that we didn't handle very well since it came as a complete surprise and a big oops, where did that come from? So we want our teams to be focused on blockers and also, of course, on flow. On the portfolio level, we are having an operations review where we are looking at dependencies, and this is where the managers come into play again. We need the managers to be involved in those because systemic changes is not something that the teams can do anything about. We need the managers here to help with fixing systemic things. We're looking at the risk review blockers. Of course, the information will seep up from the team level to the coordination level. And there, the managers will participate together with the service delivery or service request managers to understand why is this happening and what can we do to help each other to remove these obstacles that we have seen happen over the past period of time. And the last thing is the strategy review, which Kanban proposes not yearly because things change so rapidly. So the suggestion is at least revisit your strategy once every quarter to see does it still stick so that you don't keep working in a direction that doesn't really make sense anymore. Things do change so quickly. So these are the feedback loops that you are having both on the team level horizontally as well as on the different levels of the organization. What's it called? Vertically, yeah. So we are trying to get a grip of the organization in any in every direction that we can possibly think of. And your ability to manage these cross-team dependencies is going to determine your service delivery efficiency. And we are very concerned about how we can handle those dependencies because they are there. We cannot remove them completely, that's impossible. But at least let's handle them in a structured way. So there are different ways of doing it, and with kind permission from Kanban University, I'm showing you a reservation system per team where you have your team working with whatever they're working, upstream, downstream, so on and so forth. But you also have a reservation system where you can see somebody's requiring our services and they need them by a particular time. And here we have a class of booking system where we are having a standby ticket indicating that if you have time to help us with this, we would be really, really happy to get it in week 24. But we have a reserved class booking saying we would really like to have it in week 25. In case that team didn't make it, they have made a guaranteed class booking, say if we didn't make it in week 24 or 25, we promise you, we sign in blood that we are going to deliver it in week 26. So you are having explicit policies around how you are handling your dependencies across teams. And now I'm going to show you an example from real life from a big program that I was being leading, and particularly my own dependency board here, which was in fact on a whole wall. There were 12 teams, subcontractors and what have you, and things were really all over the place. And then we decided we are going to make this wall. We are going to show when somebody depending on somebody else. There were managers in front of that wall twice a week. And if there were cases of conflicts, which you can see in week 24 here, there would be managers to decide, okay, if we cannot clone people and we can't do that yet, then who gets that team first? Is it the one red ticket or is it the other red ticket? And you can read more about it in my basics guide to Kanban if you would like to. So this is what I'm going to say about this, except for the fact that we were doing this 7 weeks rolling. So we would have a 7-week perspective at any which time to show what dependencies do we have. And again, this is from actual reality, being practical about how to handle dependencies. So the key elements, your enterprise potential will depend on your leadership maturity. And if you want to scale, you need to eliminate delay and fat tail lead time distributions. And if you hold somebody accountable, there's more likelihood that it's going to happen. And agility at scale depends on whether you can fix quality issues and manage dependencies and blockers. And fourth, and that's very strange for me because usually it's 1, 2, 3, but I added a number 4 here. You are most likely to be working with artificial deadlines based on gut feeling or crystal balls or what do I know. But you need to break this vicious circle and start measuring lead times because they are telling you something about how are you actually performing. When you're just, and I've done that and I'm not happy to mention it, but as an IT project manager for more than 25 years, I've been pulling out a few deadlines of my sleeve as well, and they didn't really stick. But all in all, you scale Kanban by doing the basics really well, meaning that the 6 general practices is what you need to be very good at living in your daily life. We have a recipe now. We know what the outcome is. Enterprise agility, and we do that by maturing the organization. And we also do it by agreeing on priorities across departments and teams. And we are mitigating cross-boundary flow stoppers. The ingredients: higher management maturity, systems thinking, flow, and predictable service delivery. And the way we're putting it together, we are using the Kanban method, and we have the Kanban maturity model as our guide to what we can expect to be wanting to do in terms of using the general practices. And as I mentioned before, enterprise agility stops when the first manager says, I don't care, this is not for me, I'm going to do something completely different. Forget about enterprise agility. Here you see the Kanban maturity model. It's a very big and thick book, but it's really good, at least if you are a Kanban coach. There's always guidance there. And then I've written this basic guide to Kanban, which I'm happy to show you here if you want to see it. And then I just want to mention that in the beginning of next year, there's going to be a bunch of certified Kanban training that I'll be offering. And it would be lovely to see some of you there, maybe. And if you want to connect, please do so on LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever you would like to connect. And other than that, I guess there is almost no time for questions, I guess. I don't know if anybody has anything they would like to ask very quickly. There is one question here.
Once you're growing in this Kanban flow, it put some stress on the organization that either would require that your like shadow IT, the service delivery, or that the service delivery needs to reshape, and it's not going to reshape, then you need to have the bigger boss that has relates in both part of the organization that are aligned. So how can you do that a deliberate thing instead of accidental shadow IT?
Well, if you're talking about how to implement this, I've been fortunate enough to work with bosses that says, this makes perfectly good sense to me, this is what I want to do, I want to go Kanban. And that's much easier because then we don't have to discuss it in the teams where you might say, well, we're working kind of scrummish, or I prefer safe, or I prefer something else, or I prefer nothing at all because I'm happy the way things are now, completely unstructured. So when you have a boss saying, we cannot live with that anymore, we need to have more structure, we need to clean up our system and decide, okay, this is our shelf, and we put socks here, and we put blouses here, and we put trousers here. Unless you have a boss, or when you have a boss saying like this, it's very easy. But I very often work with teams that had been forced to working with Scrum, and if you have an unpredictable daily life, how can you plan in even the shortest sprint? It's impossible to say, well, we're going to have 2 incidents next week, and we're going to have 1 the week after, and then 3. Nobody knows. So when things are very unpredictable, forget about working in sprints. It's not going to work. So sometimes it's the teams that are pulling and say, we cannot work like this. Can we use Kanban, please? And then often managers, they're quite wise and say, yes, of course you can. And then there is a mix. But things work, in my view, better when you are working the same way all. Class of service, my friend. We have class of service saying if there's something like an incident, that's an expedite. So it kind of goes across any process that you have decided, any prioritization mechanism, and saying this is just important, go fix it now. And people usually recognize an expedite when they see it. If you're working in a company and you can't send any invoices to your clients, this is an expedite. So you are having different kind of classes of service saying this is more important than this, this is more important than those two. So you are kind of sorting the work that you are doing in work item types, depending on new development, bug fixing, whatever, but also class of service that can run in any of these work item types. So you can have expedites in any work item type, and that overhauls anything else that happens. Just need to fix it. Go fix it now.